The date was June 11th, 1979. A heavy, somber silence draped itself over the city of Los Angeles, stretching all the way to the dusty, red horizons of Monument Valley. It was a silence that the world hadn't truly felt since the golden age of the silent screen passed away into the shadows of history. John Wayne, the man who was more than just a movie star, the man who had become the living, breathing symbol of the American spirit, had taken his final breath at the age of 72. As the news rippled across the globe, from the high-rises of New York to the smallest, most remote villages in Europe and Asia, it felt as though a mountain had simply vanished from the landscape. The Duke was gone, but as the funeral processions ended and the flags returned to full mast, something extraordinary, almost supernatural, began to happen. The man known as Marion Morrison did not fade into the dusty archives of Hollywood's past. Instead, he grew. He became something larger than biology, something more permanent than celluloid. He became a ghost that haunts the high plains of our collective imagination, a silhouette that never fades, even as the film grain of time tries to obscure the past and the dust of history settles on the artifacts of the 20th century. This was the end of an era, but the beginning of an eternity. He was not just a person anymore. He was a phenomenon that would echo through the canyons of time for generations to come. Today, we aren't just looking back at a long and storied career. We are witnessing the birth of an immortal icon. This is not merely the story of an actor who died, but the story of a legend that refused to leave the set. Even now, in a world dominated by digital effects, fleeting fame, and artificial intelligence, his presence is felt. We see it in the grit of every hero. We hear it in the silence between lines of dialogue, and we feel it in the grain of every vintage film. This is the definitive exploration of the immortal Duke. Why does his image remain unshakable 45 years after he rode into his final sunset? How did a boy from Winterset, Iowa, carry the weight of an entire nation's ideals on his broad shoulders? Join us as we pull back the curtain on the legacy that changed Hollywood and the world forever. This is the story of a man who survived the cameras to live in the soul of cinema itself. We are diving deep into the psychology, the technique, and the sheer willpower of the man who defined the 20th century hero. From the dusty trails of his early films to the majestic sunsets of his final masterpieces, we will trace the footsteps of a giant who never learned how to back down from a fight, no matter how high the stakes or how long the odds. We are peeling back the layers of the man, the actor, and the myth to discover what truly lies beneath that weathered Stetson hat. Every scar on his face told a story, and every line in his voice echoed a century of struggle. To understand the immortal legacy, we must first travel back to the humble, dusty beginnings that most people have forgotten in the rush of modern life. Born Marion Robert Morrison in 1907, he was not born with a silver spoon or a Stetson hat. He was a boy of the soil, a son of a struggling pharmacist who moved his family to the harsh, unforgiving landscapes of California after a series of business failures left them with nothing but their pride and a desire for a new start in the Golden West. It was here, amidst the orange groves and the lonely, sun-baked trails of Lancaster, that the character of John Wayne began to forge in the white-hot heat of reality. He wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for a way to survive. He found work in the prop departments of silent film studios, moving heavy furniture, carrying equipment under the blistering sun, and watching the mechanics of storytelling from the dark sidelines of the stage. He wasn't a student of theater, he was a student of the set. He watched legends like the real-life Wyatt Earp, who walked those same studio lots as a consultant, and he absorbed the quiet, deadly grace of the men who had actually lived through the Wild West. This wasn't acting, it was an apprenticeship in humanity. He learned that a man's true strength is measured not by his words, but by his endurance in the face of misfortune. The young Marion Morrison was an athlete, a football player at USC, but destiny had other plans. An injury at sea ended his athletic career, but opened the door to the dream factory of Hollywood. In those early years, he was known as Duke, a nickname given to him because of his loyal dog. Little did he know that the name Duke would one day be shouted in theaters around the world. He started as an extra, a face in the crowd, learning how to exist in front of a camera. He watched how directors composed shots, how lighting changed a mood, and how the film grain of the era added a layer of reality to the fiction. He was a blue-collar worker in a white-collar industry. He didn't have the polish of the Broadway actors who were flocking to Hollywood for the new talkies. He had something better. He had authenticity. He had the walk of a man who knew the weight of a saddle and the smell of a horse. He was building the foundation of a legacy, brick by brick, film by film, even when the world didn't know his name yet. He understood the visual language of the screen before he ever spoke a line of dialogue. His early career was a brutal, decade-long struggle that would have broken a lesser man. For nearly 10 years, he was trapped in Poverty Row westerns, cheap, fast-produced films that were shot in days, not weeks. These films were often ignored by the elite, but they were the training ground for a king. Most critics and actors saw these films as a dead end, but for John Wayne, they were a laboratory of cinematic movement. Marion, now dubbed John Wayne by studio executives who found his real name too feminine for a cowboy, used every single one of those 80-plus films to perfect his craft. He learned how to fall off a horse without breaking his neck, how to throw a cinematic punch that looked real, and how to use his massive 6-foot, 4-frame to dominate a lens. He was a man of the working class, filming 3 or 4 movies a month just to keep food on the table. By the time 1939 rolled around, he was a seasoned veteran who had paid his dues in blood, sweat, and trail dust. He was ready to become the steel that would support the entire Western genre for the next 40 years. He was the dark horse waiting for the right gate to open, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who knew his time was coming. In 1939, director John Ford took a massive risk. He cast the B-movie actor John Wayne as the Ringo Kid in Stagecoach. The moment Wayne appears on screen, twirling his Winchester rifle with one hand, the history of cinema shifted on its axis forever. He didn't just play a role, he announced the arrival of the weathered hero. Before this moment, Hollywood heroes were often sanitized and polished. Wayne brought the dirt. He brought the smell of real leather, the sting of actual trail dust, and the crushing weight of a heavy conscience. He showed the world that a hero wasn't someone who was perfect, but someone who was willing to endure the impossible for the sake of what was right. This was the birth of the modern protagonist, a man of few words but infinite action. Stagecoach was the catalyst that turned a struggling actor into a global phenomenon. It defined a genre and launched a legend into the stratosphere of American mythology. The film grain of Stagecoach captured a raw energy that had never been seen before, a texture of reality that modern digital cameras still struggle to replicate today. The relationship between John Ford and John Wayne was complex and productive. Ford was a brutal taskmaster who knew that Wayne had a depth that had never been tapped. He would belittle Wayne on set, pushing him to the brink of rage just to pull out a deeper performance. He wanted to see the pain and the soul beneath the surface. Together, they created masterpieces like The Searchers, where Wayne played Ethan Edwards, a man consumed by hate and obsession. This wasn't the good guy in a white hat. This was a complex figure who challenged the idea of what a hero should be. Wayne proved that he could play the monster as well as the savior. He redefined the American hero as a man of deep contradictions, violent yet tender, lonely yet legendary. Through the thick film grain of these works, we see the evolution of a man who became the moral conscience of a nation. He showed us that the hardest trail is the one that leads into our own hearts, and the darkest shadows are those we carry within ourselves. Let's dive deeper into The Searchers. This film is a psychological study of obsession. Wayne's performance as Ethan Edwards is a masterclass in power. Notice the way he stands in the doorway, a silhouetted figure against the vastness of the desert. He is a man who can never truly come inside, a man who is forever destined to wander the wilderness. This iconic shot, captured with the perfect amount of dust and natural light, summarizes the entire tragedy of the frontier. Ethan is a man out of time, whose skills are needed in war but have no place in peace. Wayne captured this loneliness with a gaze that seemed to look through the screen and into the very soul of the audience. He wasn't just acting. He was channeling the collective guilt and hope of an entire civilization. The film grain in this movie doesn't just represent age. It represents the grit of the soul, the texture of a life lived on the edge of destruction. Then came Rio Bravo. In this film, Wayne showed a different side of leadership. He wasn't the lone wolf, but the steady hand that brought a broken group of people together. He played Sheriff John T. Chance, a man who refused help because he didn't want to see more good men die. He played characters who were tired, characters who had seen too much war and death, but who still stood up when the bell rang. This film was about professional pride and the strength of friendship. It was a relaxed, character-driven masterpiece that showed the Duke's ability to command a room with just a look. His performance in The Quiet Man took him away from the desert and into the green hills of Ireland, proving that his charisma wasn't tied to a horse or a gun, but to his soul. It was a romantic, poetic side of the Duke that everyone adored. It showed that beneath the rough exterior was a man of great tenderness and humor. But the Western was always his home. In his later years, films like True Grit gave him the chance to play the old lion, the man whose body was failing but whose spirit was as sharp as a razor. Playing Rooster Cogburn, Wayne showed a vulnerability and comedic timing that surprised critics. Winning the Oscar was a tribute to a lifetime of standing tall against the wind. He mastered the art of aging on screen, showing us that growing old didn't mean growing weak. It meant growing wise, growing harder, and becoming a legend that the young could look up to in times of trouble. He embraced his wrinkles and his scars as badges of honor, proving that a man's value increases with the miles he has traveled and the battles he has won, both on screen and off. He was the grandfather of the American spirit, teaching us that even when the body fails, the will can remain unbreakable. Let's talk about the physical language of this icon, because no one understood the power of presence better than John Wayne. Every movement he made, every gesture of his hand, every squint of his eyes was a deliberate choice. Think about that walk. It wasn't just movement. It was a rhythmic, purposeful stride that felt like it was keeping time with the pulse of the earth. It was the walk of a man who owned every square inch of the land he stood upon. It was a walk that said, "I am here, and I am not moving for anyone." Actors today spend entire careers trying to capture that level of authority, but for the Duke, it was part of his very being. He understood that in the vastness of the American West, a man had to be physically significant just to be noticed by history. He was a mountain that walked, a force of nature that the camera couldn't help but follow. His presence was so immense that he often seemed to dwarf the very scenery around him. And then there was the voice, that deep, resonant drawl, gravelly like a dry riverbed in the heat of a Mojave summer. He didn't just speak lines, he weighed them like gold. He understood that a well-placed pause, a moment of deep silence between words, was often more powerful than 1,000 pages of dialogue. He mastered the art of the reaction shot, knowing that what he didn't say was often more vital than what he did. When you combine that walk and that voice with the vintage 35mm film grain and the dancing dust particles on the lens, you get an aesthetic that transcends time. This is why we insist on using these effects in our series. Those textures represent an era when things and people were built to last, when quality was measured in character, not in digital pixels. Wayne wasn't just a face on a screen. He was a monument in motion, a living statue that moved with the weight of destiny. John Wayne's impact was never confined to a cinema. It bled into the fabric of history. He was a political giant and a symbol of an older world. But behind the public persona was a craftsman fighting his own private wars. In 1964, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, the Big C. Most stars would have hidden such a diagnosis. Not the Duke. He went public, telling the world that he was going to fight it and win, breaking the stigma for an entire generation. And he did win, for 15 more years, despite losing a lung and ribs. He showed us that the greatest enemy isn't found on a battlefield, but within our own bodies, and that the only way to fight it is with a smile and a stubborn heart. He turned his struggle into a mission of hope, becoming a symbol of resilience for millions. He was a champion of